Hi everyone, and welcome to this information session with Uppsala University. My name is Lina and I work for the Division for Internationalization, and I'm joined here today by our university guide, Mikael Norby. And the topic of today's session is to get to know your new hometown, Uppsala. Just a reminder that if you're admitted to our campus on Gotland, you should not attend this session, but rather our session about Visby, which is given in 2 hours' time. This session will solely discuss Uppsala. So with that, I will hand over to Mikael, who will guide you through some of the highlights from Uppsala's history.
Well, thank you. And I must say, if you Gotlanders want to learn about Uppsala, stay along. I shall now, of course, do the dreaded thing to try to switch to a PowerPoint. And I usually fail, so bear with me, please. Do you see anything?
Yes, but I think you need to go to exactly bildspelen from the beginning. I think maybe you need to press the button there that says Fortsätt bildspel on top of the picture. Might be that's the issue. Or not? No?
There we go. Oops.
Oh, now we have it in full.
Yes,
screen.
so sorry about that, spoiling everything and so on. For some strange way, it's a long time ago since one did this. Well, this is perhaps in one way an odd way, but also a very correct way of starting. This is Old Uppsala. This is today a village 6 kilometers north of Uppsala. And here, of course, you have the burial mounds of, at least according to the sagas, kings Aun, Egil, and Eskil. That is most certainly not true, because archaeology has proved that at least one of the persons buried here is female. But this is the beginning. This is roughly 1500 years ago, when Old Uppsala was the center point. And this is not even the Vikings. This is the grandfathers of the Vikings. The roof you see in the background is actually the first church there, which for a short time was the cathedral. But now you wonder, where is the city? And the city is actually just when you turn around, as I said, 6 kilometers down across the fields. And you already see the classical silhouette there, the castle and the cathedral. To give you a better idea of all of this, the satellite picture, of course, the scale of this is a square 25 kilometers. And they could actually well have pushed the picture a bit downwards. Uppsala is really spread out. I think a rough calculation I did was 26 kilometers north to south and 19 east to west, home to 200,000 people. So it will never really feel very dense. It's a really spread out place. But you will also notice around the city, fields and forests. So nature is not far away at any point. The old plan of Uppsala, this is actually the oldest proper map we have, and it shows the layout that was planned in 1654. That didn't actually happen until a little bit later, but this is, of course, a very square layout, but it gives you the idea of how small the town was. There's only 8 blocks across. The cathedral in the very middle and the castle. The plan was finally built after the big city fire of 1702. So actually, quite a lot of these street layouts are still with us today. But the cathedral, it's a bit hard to get away from because it is really in the center of the city. And I just felt a bit over the top and thought I had found a complete circle around it, but not quite. But you notice, hopefully, that there is a clear edge to the city. if you look up to the top of this picture, you see that the forest starts, the fields and then the forest. So there is inside the city and a very clear outside the city. But now back to history, because here you have, this is probably one of the best views to see anything of the real sites. The cathedral itself, of course, in front of that, with the strange cupola, Gustavianum, and the main building of the university. I'll come back to all of them. But the cathedral, stepping into it, you realize how big it is. It's 120 meters long, 32 meters up to the inner ceiling. It was built not just for the needs of Uppsala, but rather for the needs of the entire country. This is the place where the kings were crowned, where the archbishops and bishops were consecrated. This was for royal weddings, royal baptisms. This was the central church of Sweden, and it still is the church of the archbishop. And even from these three pictures, I think you realize it changes quite dramatically depending on the light. If there's sunlight, it's a very light and bright place. If it's gloomy and dark outside, it feels quite heavy. So even if you're not really interested in churches, look in a couple of times. It's worth it. To then carry on, you have the main square. And from the architectural point of view, it's odd because it's a planned square. Usually the streets comes in at the corner of the square, but here you can see they come in the middle of the block. And this was planned. You probably also realize that this is not really a picture. This is computer generated because they are rebuilding the square at the moment. And this is what the architects want us to believe that it will be looking like. It used to be a bus station, had been a bus station for a number of years, and they're trying to make it a proper square again. I wish them all luck with that. At this square, we also had just off the picture in the right-hand corner, what was referred to as the ugliest building in town, the Åhléns department store. This was built in the early 60s, and I should say people have spent probably something like, well, 50 years telling each other how horribly ugly this building is, or rather was. Because a couple of years ago, the brand that runs this department store got a bit upset with always being mentioned as the ugliest building or one of the ugliest buildings in Sweden, and they rebuilt it like this. I don't know if it's any better, but you don't really see it anymore. It's a sort of a stealth department store now. So this is a thing you can probably experience. I wanted to give you not only historical pictures of the beautiful buildings, but I must admit there is an awful lot of perhaps not so inspiring buildings in the city as well. But as a historian, I will tend to keep at the historical ones. Across the main square and linking this is the main pedestrian street. And it runs for a fair length, I think it's almost a kilometer long. And you will find actually most of the shopping there. And here you see that there is plenty of architecture in Sweden, and especially also in Uppsala, that is of that rather, shall we say, shoebox design. I find it really, really interesting that architects keep constructing buildings with flat roofs in Sweden, despite that they know that we get snow and quite a lot of snow, and that can be troublesome for buildings with flat roofs, but well, they seem to conveniently forget that every time. Then back to the historical buildings. The castle is very, very obvious thing in the city. It's large, has actually been even larger. It shows that the city, first of all, is the capital of the province of Uppland. And the province of Uppland is in the, shall we say, the historic order, the number one, the first province of the country. until the fact that Stockholm was also made into province. So now we're sort of theoretically joined first. The castle has been the home for the kings of Sweden on a number of occasions. Uppsala was a popular place for holding parliaments, and the kings kept moving about. So Uppsala Castle have seen a lot of history. It dates back to 1549. But when you start to see it from a bow, you'll start to realize things about it. Most of the castle that you see from the city is actually a rather narrow screen between these two towers. And the main parts of the castle were actually facing the other way. They were the two side buildings, so to say, facing the park. And the little park in front is still the provincial governor's private garden, because the royal governor of the province still lives in the castle, only family that lives up there. But behind the castle, this rather intricate arrangement you can see is the old castle gardens that are today a part of the botanical gardens of the university. And if you stand down there and look up at the castle, you get an idea that all this was originally the palace gardens, but it was given to the university as a botanical garden in the 1790s. Partly the university needed a new botanical garden, and partly the king was running a bit short of money and found it expensive to keep this big park, and he gallantly, Gustav III, gave it to the university on condition that the king could use it whenever he needs to. And I think in the past 240 years since that gift, the king has needed it twice, but still. If you instead stand up at the castle courtyard at the center top of this picture and looks down, this is the view you get. The botanical gardens of Uppsala University, actually we have both the botanical garden and the old botanical garden that is referred to as the Linnaeus Gardens. Both of these are very special. The university is running a number of museums and gardens, and as students you actually have free access to them, so that's kind of nice. But the building you see in the center here is the old Department of Systematical Botany, and it's built like a temple, of course, Greek temple, to the glory of Linnaeus, the great botanist, and I'll talk more about him tomorrow on my little talk about university history. But the park is really big. This is just the entrance, and there are some 13,000 species there, so it's a good place for a walk. Next to it, you find the Carolina, the university library, or one of them, because there's quite a few today. And this place has a very special function and place in the hearts of many Uppsalians and many students, both present and former, because the balcony on that building is hugely important. But before that, I should mention, this is a big working library today, plenty of study spaces. It's an incredibly well-equipped library. So if you have difficulty finding a place to study, Carolina is a very good place, and it is in the middle of the city. So go in and make use of it. It's strangely empty these days. But now back to the balcony. If you stand there and look down over the town, I'm sorry, this is not a good picture, but it was the only one I could find. You have a slope straight down into the city, and you have a very long street. It's Queen's Street from the castle leading down to the main square, and further on, it's actually almost 6 kilometers long. And this looks suitably empty, but once a year, it looks like this. This is the last of April. This is the student carnival of Uppsala. And just before 3 o'clock, everyone who is in the right mood will congregate here, and they will all be waiting for the chancellor to step out, or sorry, the vice chancellor to step out on the balcony. and exactly at 3 o'clock proclaiming spring. So don't leave Uppsala the last of April, because then you will be missing something. And don't even try to drive a car that day. Most of the cities close down to car traffic because there will be people everywhere on the streets. To carry on, just briefly on the university buildings, as I said, there will be much more about them tomorrow. The oldest one, just opposite from the church, is, or the cathedral, I should say, is Gustavianum. And Gustavianum is the oldest house still standing belonging to the university. It dates back to the 1620s. It stands on a much older foundation. It's actually the remains of 2 medieval buildings that has been built into one. So I should say the house itself, or at least the lower parts of the house, is probably 600 or even 700 years old, but the top half is only 400 years old now. Sadly, unless you are here for more than a year, you will not see this house opened. It's closed for refurbishment, and actually you will not even be able to see the house right now because it's totally covered in scaffolding and building plastic. So it's just a box. But normally this is the home of the University Museum. And up at the top in that strange cupola, there you have the anatomical theater where autopsies and public operations were performed. Just behind it, you have the university main building. And I picked an autumn picture, so it should be somewhat true. And the university is really spread over the city. It's actually, as you heard already, it's spread over 2 cities. It's both Uppsala and Visby. But in Uppsala, there's more than 260 buildings belonging to the university. And still, the fact is, if you step into a taxi and tell them, drive me to Uppsala University, this is probably where the driver will bring you. The main building is still regarded as the center point. In there, you have the large auditorium, you have classrooms, you have some central offices there. Actually, I am seated right now in, well, just behind the third window from the right on the upper floor, partly obscured by the statue. And it is a magnificent building. I hope we tend to try to make certain that all the new students get something done in there, even if it's just a welcome reception or the introduction to something, but everyone should at least have done something actively in the building, or else just come here. The main auditorium is also used as a concert hall, so there's a lot of things going on there. So keep an eye for what's happening in the main building. Then I guess we should start from the other tack. This is, up until now, it has been historical and mostly pretty Uppsala. Now is the question, where do you come in? Well, your departments, of course, will be scattered over the town, but where will you live? Well, this is Flogsta, and I think quite a few of you will end up living there. These houses, perhaps not the most inspiring 1970s architecture, have proved incredibly sturdy because there is now, I should say, more than 12 generations of students who have lived through this area. It's a little more than 50 years old now. And it was built outside the city. And the plan was that students should be, well, in peace, so they could concentrate on their studies, or if you want to be slightly more cynical, that their parties wouldn't disturb anyone else. But that is a rather open question. Today, the city has expanded, so it's more integrated into the city. It's not outside, and actually outside Uppsala is small. Outside meant at the most 15 minutes biking. By the way, you need a bicycle. I guess it is theoretically possible to survive in Uppsala without a bicycle, but why chance it? Everyone moves by bike here. I'll come back to that in a while, but bicycles are essential. An oddity that some of you may already have heard about, because every now and then it makes the news for some reason or another, is of course the Flugsta Scream at 10 o'clock. And I have been asking around if it's on certain nights or any night you feel like it. Don't be surprised if you all of a sudden will hear a lot of noise. It's simply people opening their windows and gives a good shout. I don't know if it's some sort of therapy or if it's just upkeeping tradition, but it can probably be rather nice to shout out general frustration or general joy or whatever to make a loud noise. 10 o'clock at night, a minute or two, and then you're supposed to stop. There is a number of stories of how this started. I don't think any one of them is true, but the event is carrying on. So don't be surprised, be prepared. There are, of course, more student areas, but I honestly didn't find any good pictures of them. Every time I do something like this, I realize there are so many things that we need pictures of. So I'm actually doing a list of things to go out and take pictures of for next year. But this is Flugsta anyway. And yes, if it couldn't get any boxier, I mean, what is more box-like than the home of all the flat packs in the world? IKEA. Of course, there is an IKEA in Uppsala, so you don't have to think too much about how to furnish the things you need for your room or apartment. On the eastern side of the city, towards the main highway exit towards Stockholm, is a large area of large outlets and well, big stores of all kinds, including the IKEA. There is, of course, the problem of transport, but Uppsala being a student city, the buses tends to be quite, I should not say understanding, but they're at least used to people trying to move flat packs on an ordinary city bus. And I myself have perhaps not fond, but very clear memories of trying to move an IKEA bed by bike across the city. So anything is possible. And if you get a couple of friends, you can probably manage anything. Then things to do in Uppsala that is not study related or student corps related. You have a rather lovely countryside around. I'm trying now to give you a few winter pictures as well, because keep in mind, there will be winter. Straight through the city runs the river Fyris. Actually, in English, that would be the fierce one, at least in Old English. It's not a very fierce. It used to be a whitewater river, but it's now quite peaceful. And along the river downstream, there are a pathway, a lovely pathway leading all the way down. I don't know if you can see, but across the fields in the upper right side of the picture, I think you can see the city. So this is perhaps 5 or 6 kilometers downstream from Uppsala. And the path, which actually you can see a little off on the very, very left side of the picture, runs along the river all the way down to the point where it exits into the lake, stops being a river, and it empties into Lake Mälaren, one of the largest lakes in Sweden. So that is a very nice walk or bike tour. Of course, if you get hold of a boat, then Lake Mälaren is huge, and that can probably keep you occupied. Wintertime, hoping that we get a decent winter. Long distance skating is one of the most popular pastimes. Long distance skating is referred to as the hobby of professors. I think students are included. Around the city also forest. And you should be aware the Scandinavian, or at least Swede, Norwegian and Finn, tend to have a slightly different approach to forests than perhaps many others. The forest is not something dark and something you should be careful with. Forest is a place where you spend time picking mushrooms or berries, or just walking around, just enjoying it. And if you feel a bit nervous about starting with a big open forests, there is actually something as unusual as a city forest in Uppsala. There are city parks, of course, they're quite common, but in Uppsala, there's actually even a city forest, which is a fairly large piece of forest land that is crisscrossed by tracks for dog walkers, joggers, and everyone. But the whole thing is then fenced in, or at least lined by roads. So if you manage to get lost, you will not be lost for very long. And that may be a sort of a good training. But I think you should, but perhaps together with someone who knows a little about it, go out and experience the Scandinavian forest, because that is such an essential part of developing, shall we say, the Scandinavian character. And for Sweden especially, this is a country where timber has never been a scarce resource. If you can build in wood, why build in stone? Wood is available everywhere. So you will understand this, or you can understand it at least, with this constant availability of forest. And I think you should at least try it. Then this is probably a building that many of you will see when you arrive. This is the old railway station in Uppsala. It's actually one of the older railway stations in Sweden. The track between Uppsala and Stockholm came along in the early 1860s, actually late 1850s, but it took some time to get it officially opened. But for some totally unknown reason, a new railway station was built just next door, and it's mostly underground. But railway station and bus station is in the real middle of the city, and that's probably where many of you will be arriving. And that's, of course, also the place from where you can travel. Because I really recommend that you do a bit of traveling. And especially the next month. I'm sorry to sort of hurry you along, but August is running out. And September is really what is regarded as the end of the tourist season in Sweden. Most places in the countryside, the castles, the stately homes, the manor houses, and the places that is not located in cities or big towns, they tend to close 15th of September, last of September. So I should say you have a month. And there are so close to Uppsala that I really recommend. Easily accessible by bus, you have the small town of Sigtuna, which for a short time was the capital of Sweden. It came into existence in exactly the breaking point between the pagan Old Norse religion and Christianity. Old Uppsala was the center of the pagan gods, and the king was supposed to be the pagan high priest. But Christianity came in around 1020, so 1,000 years ago, roughly. And all of a sudden, we had a Christian king. He needed a Christian town. And Sigtuna was built to order. Today, you can still see the remains of 5 churches there. one in action and 4 as ruins. There's still 3 more of them underground, or 4 more of them underground. And the city is, well, town, I should say, part. I know I keep saying, but it is a cute little place. It attracts a lot of tourists, but for a good reason. You have the idea of what a small Swedish town would have looked like 100 years. They have been very good at preserving it. It's down by Lake Mälaren, so you have a very nice waterfront. You have these historical ruins, and you have a very, very good little museum with actually some of the best Viking artifacts that you will find anywhere. It's a good place, and it's easily accessible by bus, so go there. And then a little further down the lake system, you have Skokloster, a large Baroque castle built in the 1650s, 1660s, 77 rooms, 80,000 objects still on site. This is also open for another month. If you have some historic interest, go there. It is such a special place, and I must admit I have a rather soft spot for it because I used to work out there when I was a student. So yeah, I like it. To the north, you have a very different story. There you have ironworking. And during the 16, 17, and 1800s, the ironworks, the iron mines and the ironworks produce huge incomes for their owners. And these incomes, in many ways, were spent on manor houses and all kinds of building, trying to make ideal villages for the workers and so on. And there's still a lot of really exciting places up there. Today, almost hidden in the forest, but you have. This is Österbybruk. This is the largest one. This is still a sizable town. And this is also easily accessible by bus from Uppsala. It takes you 45 minutes from the central bus station. And the manor house is today used for all kinds of cultural activities. So this is also a good place to go. And we are really not that far away from the sea. I've been talking about the lake, and the lake is really good. But if you want to see, well, 70 kilometers away, you have this place, well, 75. You have this place. This is Öregrund. And for some reason, which I really can't explain, there are 2 buses an hour from central Uppsala to this place out on the coast. It's a town. It was founded already in the 1300s. And this is so typical of what the small coastal towns looks like. And it's, I mean, in an hour, a little more than an hour, you can go there by bus, by an ordinary bus. You don't have to order anything, just step on the bus and you're there. Keep the red clock tower in mind. You see it on the right side. There you have it in a different angle. And the open sea is just off the picture to the left. But this is also one of these places that is so easy to come to, which is so different from Uppsala. Uppsala is so very inland. It's really a typical of these inland cities and towns. Öregrund give you a good idea of what the coastal towns are like. So these are just some of my suggestions for what you spend your weekends with for the next few weeks. Then, of course, you have Stockholm. But my recommendation would be wait with Stockholm for a while. Stockholm will be there. Stockholm is open all year round. All the museums, all the activities, everything that is there will be open all around the year. So do Stockholm in October. Give these smaller places priority now for the first month, because you only have them until September. Otherwise, you have to wait they will probably not open up again until May next year. So concentrate on that. Always keep in your mind that there are four seasons to this country, and they are very clearly defined. And the summer season is sadly coming to an end. Autumn is interesting, but the summer is ending. Now, Stockholm, as you see here, is built on islands. And I'll give you another picture that is slightly faked. They have compressed it a little, but it gives you the idea of this place. The capital of Sweden, of course, home to just about a quarter of the country's population. And from Uppsala, once again, so easily accessible. Train from the railway station, more than 60 trains a day. The train runs 40 minutes and you arrive in the very middle. The railway station is just on the right side, right-hand corner of this picture. And then you have it all. You have, of course, Town Hall with the high tower on the right-hand side. You have Parliament, the reddish building in, well, center right. The Royal Palace, the big square thing, center left. And then the old town with the towers and the huge building in the lower left side, the Nordic Museum, and behind it, you have the Vasa and, well, if you have to, the ABBA Museum. And Stockholm is just lovely to walk in. But if you are not properly prepared, it may be also a slightly frustrating place to walk, because ever so often you realize that I'm on the wrong island. I want to be on the other side of the water. And it may be perhaps only 100 meters across, but still, swimming is usually not an option. So you have to walk around, and it can be a rather long walk. So a map is a good idea. Or else, if you get lost in Stockholm, it's not so bad, because most of it is, the inner parts of Stockholm is just so wonderful. So keep going anyway. But as I said, wait a little with that. Save it until autumn. Final words, Uppsala, very flat. Only the ridge line across is an obstacle, so good terrain for bicycles. This is a picture taken at, let's see now, 3:15 on the 19th of December. 3:15, it will get dark. The autumn will turn into winter and it will get dark. When the snow comes, it becomes much better, but please be prepared, it will get dark. Well, just another darkness picture and the third one. But whatever you do, I realize I've talked far too long now, but do enjoy Uppsala. There is a lot of history. If you see me somewhere, I'm almost always prepared to talk more history. And of course, there will be the university talk a little later tomorrow. But with that, I think I shall turn this off and leave the word to Lina again.
Thank you so much, Mikael. So we have a few minutes for questions if you want to submit any questions to Mikael. I also in the chat, I wrote the names of the places to visit that he talked about in case you need them written down in print, because they contain a lot of weird Swedish characters, some of them. I see we also have a comment from a student who has been able to go to IKEA and buy a desk and bring it back on the bus, and she said, or he or she said, it was completely fine and the bus driver was okay with it, so don't worry about that. So let's see, we have one question coming in from Kayla, and she's wondering, what is the best book to learn about the history of Uppsala?
What a pity that you asked that question. If you read Swedish, there are a few decent handbooks on the history of Uppsala. But I'm sorry to say, in English, there is almost nothing. just everything is, if you read German, there is a bit more, but in English, there is very little at the moment. As a historian, I'm not happy to say this, but a collection of Wikipedia articles will probably help you more than anything you can find written if you're stuck with English literature at the moment. I'm sorry. People keep telling me that I have to write that book, and I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, great. Or not great that there's no book, but you should definitely write one. Another question we got from a student who is wondering, where can we see the Northern Lights?
Well, I was actually toying with the idea of including a picture with the Nordic Lights over Uppsala, because if the conditions are right and if you're lucky, you can actually see them as far south as here. There is, as for everything today, an app for this. I think there's even 2 apps following Nordic Lights and Aurora, and they will give you alerts. The problem is, of course, that the city light tends to block, so you really need to get away unless it's a really, really strong aurora. And then actually Old Uppsala, just north of the city, because aurora is, of course, usually from the north. And if you manage to go north of the city, you will have the light behind you and the really dark skies in front of you. So that is possible. But there have been some really good auroras over the last few years that you have been able to see from Castle Hill, which is basically in the middle of the city, looking slightly off, not just across the city, but looking slightly off. And of course, your mobile cameras can see things that you cannot. So if you see just a tiny glimmer, take a picture, and your camera will probably give you a really much better picture than anything you thought you saw. But it depends on the weather, and no promises. If you're really desperate to see it, then you probably have to travel up quite a bit north. The further north you get, the better your chances. But well, you can never guarantee it, but go north in that case. But Uppsala should be enough if the conditions are right.
Yeah, and I can also add, I know there's a Facebook group, I don't remember its name, but it's something like Northern Lights Watch Uppsala or something like that. And I know a lot of our international students are part of that and keep track of when the prognosis is good for Northern Lights. Another question we got from a student who is interested in seeing Viking history in Sweden. Do we have a chance of seeing that in Uppsala?
Well, the good collections are, of course, in the closed university museum in the Gustavianum. The provincial museum, which is also just next to the cathedral, the Uppland Museum, they have a small exhibit. And out at Old Uppsala, there is a special museum about the graves out at Old Uppsala, and also some material from the Viking Age graves there. So there are some exhibition or some parts of exhibitions on 2 museums in Uppsala. But for the really, really good objects, I'm sorry to say, the Historical Museum in Stockholm took them. They simply stashed them there. So the really good Viking exhibition in Sweden, that is in Stockholm, but well, Stockholm is easy to get to, but it would, of course, be nice to have it here where so much of it was found. But 2 small collections in Uppsala and the big one in Stockholm. That's the reply.
And we could just continue on that question because Nicole is also wondering, what museums would you recommend in Uppsala or Stockholm?
Well, that depends, of course, what your interests are. But here in Uppsala, if you are already out at Old Uppsala to see the site, then it would be stupid not to go into the museum. Sadly, it's not one of the university's museums, so you have to pay an entrance fee, which is always annoying because I'm so used to all the university museums being free for students and staff of Uppsala University. The provincial museum is good, Upplandsmuseet. There are 2 art museums in the city. The big one up at the castle, which is the regional collection, which is perhaps not brilliant, but, well, gives an idea. And then a special exhibition, a special museum built around the studio of one of the local painters here, Bror Hjort, naivistic 1930s, 40s, 50s, early 60s, painting and sculpture combined. But of course, as all these studio museums, it's sort of interesting because you have the finished works and you have the sketches and you have the works in progress and so on. So it gives a rather interesting insight. The museum runs all of these scientific museums, Museum of Medical History, Museum of Geology, Paleontology, Zoology, and they, of course, mainly meant for training, but they can still be good fun. And as I said, no entrance fee, so that's good. Stockholm, of course, is the center for all the museums of Sweden. For arts, the National Gallery and the Museum of Modern Arts, situated less than 200 meters away from each other. The Historical Museum is very good. And then, of course, I have to mention the Vasa, being a bit of a naval freak myself, that huge flagship of the Swedish Navy that sunk in 1628 and was then salvaged in the 1960s and is almost entirely rebuilt as it was. It's a strange thing to walk into a building and all of a sudden see a ship that is 70 meters long in the middle of the place. There's also, of course, a lot of royal collections of all kinds. The Royal Castle in Stockholm is open. And then new, smaller museums are being added in Stockholm. So Stockholm is a hugely museum-rich environment. So I think that can probably keep you occupied for quite a few weekends. And it's a brilliant thing to do over the winter. Go to Stockholm, see a museum, exhibition, or do something, do a bit of shopping if you need to, or just do a fika and then go back. The trains are not that expensive, so it's a good day out.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I think with that, we've actually run out of time for this session today. But thank you, all of you who submitted questions. And if we didn't have time for your question, you can always ask it in another session or email us at masterprograms@uU.se. And as mentioned, we do have another session tomorrow about like the history of the university itself. So please join that too if you want to learn more about your place of study. And if you're interested in Visby, which is where our campus on Gotland is located, we have another session about that at 1 p.m. today. So with that, thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Mikael, for presenting, and see you all at the next session, hopefully. Bye-bye.